such as they had to make the assumptions that everybody would be paid on Medicare rates, and they ran this fiscal model for us. So we've had it in rough form for about 3 to 4 months and wondering how to firm it up, as also how to present it. And because over the last 4 years, we've been able to get 60 to 80 people to come to testify at the citizens, ballot. We've always had legislators on the Maine House and Senate who would put state-based universal single-payer type bills in, and we would easily get 50 to 60 people to testify. So keep legislators there till 6 or 7 o'clock at night, listening to people come to the microphone and testify. And each time we did that, the Maine legislators figured they don't want to do that again, so they would organize a summertime, a study commission based around usually the insurance and financial services subcommittees of this Maine state legislature. So currently this summer, they've had 4 open meetings where they invite experts to come, value-based. They had the insurance commissioner from Montana, who recently negotiated, the lower Medicare rates for state of Montana employees, et cetera. And on Monday, we've been able to get on the agenda the representative who wrote this fiscal analysis for us to make an hour presentation. The idea being is here you'd have 10 to 12 legislators from the state of Maine, a third of which are very conservative, fiscally, who will hear for the first time how a state can run a fiscal model of a universal state-based payment system for the state. So at this point, it's just a fiscal analysis. It's not legislation. It has a lot of assumptions to it. It's more of a visioning document for how again, a small middle-income rural state could do this, assuming it gets all the 1332 waivers. But the strength of the study, we think, is the fact that the MECIP organization was able to do family studies for 7 different categories of income. They chose sort of single family, double family, all different sort of models in income, and they're able to do a net fiscal analysis for each of these family groups, and 80%, 6 out of the 7 family groups of various incomes will do better under a universal, state-based system. Also, they modeled it out for businesses with a progressive tax going from 0% up to 8%, depending upon the size of the business. And of course, that is a fiscal benefit for the companies that currently provide health insurance for their employees. So it's a little more of a visioning document, and we think when it gets presented in front of the state, this panel of legislators who will be able to get some publicity and maybe get some media pick up from the local media. And also, when we release it on Monday, press release, our 4-page summary, and the actual 37-page document, we'll release it to organizations such as One Payer States for you folks to think about it, noodle it, and maybe model your own state-based study, or at least look at the assumptions and hopefully run with it. And that's pretty much it for me. There may be one of our members, Tom Stern, on the phone, or Lynn Cheney, who may want to speak a little bit, but after that, I'm able to entertain questions. And again, we'll release it on Monday, so we'll probably forward it all to you at that time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hank. The others that Hank referred to, do you want to speak up and embellish what he said?
Good morning or good noon. This is Tom Stern. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well.
Good, thank you. I think I've unmuted myself and put my German Shepherd 100 yards away. Yeah, he's a talker. So I don't have a lot. I'm a physician, member of the board of directors of Maine All Care as well, originally a Massachusetts physician, primary care provider, community health provider, now living in Maine for the past 5 years. I have very little to add to what I think Hank's what I think is a sort of thoughtful presentation to you all. I don't know which members of the OPS have had beyond Chuck and Kip, have had a chance to read through the study in detail. So if I'm speaking to the somewhat uninformed, I apologize, but I do think that Hank captured all the history and the importance of understanding that this is really a preliminary fiscal plausibility study, not a legislative proposal, which would have to be very much fleshed out. I do want to include and reinforce that numbers of reasonable, though somewhat crude, assumptions were made to generate the conclusions that we have. It is very difficult to assess fully accurately provider and hospital fiscal data. Not only the data that's out there even, but also the true cost data of these groups. Likewise, it is a little bit difficult to accurately estimate the additional expenses of eye, ear, and dental care that would be assumed under this model, because the model is a model that includes benefits in those categories, as well as obviously eliminating sort of copays and deductibles. That said, the important conclusion I think to come to is that even with those limitations and with all the soon to be expected political hurdles, should a law based on the strength of this model be proposed, a fiscally sound model for a state like Maine really is plausible, workable, and worthy of campaigning for, as long as we can show the important stakeholders, political and otherwise, the expected benefits and the decrease in overall and personal cost.
This is Lynn Cheney.
Yeah,
Lynn Cheney.
go ahead, Lynn.
I just got a message from Barbara Pearson and responded, but our plan is to post the full report on the OPS website by Monday, and we'll also include our 4-page document. You'd received the 4-page summary, but we will be making some changes based on some suggestions and some final, so that will be tweaked a bit along with our press release. So it'll be available to everybody.
Thanks, Lynn. Any other comments from Maine or about Maine?
Oh, just one other, people ask why we did this. You know, because of the frustration at the federal level and also at the state level, there was a strong feel that we should do a ballot initiative. And Maine tends to be a smaller, even though because of the geography, 80% of the people live within 3 hours drive of each other, shall we say. So everybody knows everybody in Maine. It's not like Oregon or Montana that has great distance, and people in you know, Eugene really don't know the people in Portland, et cetera, or Coos Bay, et cetera, or like California. So if Maine is a ballot initiative friendly state, we had to have some sort of fiscal support, because every time we went to big money people in Maine and said, would you support us for this? They would say, show me the data. Show me some sort of fiscal data that shows that this is even possible. So again, one of the other motivations for this was as a way to sort of put it in front of some movers and shakers who might be our allies and friends, and convince them that yes, it is fiscally conceivable, possible to do it. So again, if people say it's not a definitive study, it is not a definitive study. It was sort of one other piece of the puzzle to move this project along of doing a ballot initiative in the state of Maine. So that's it. Thanks.
Chuck, this is Kip. Can I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead. This is Mike. Mike's running it for a while. Chuck's attending by phone, but please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Len and Hank, I appreciate having a chance to see the study. My 2 cents would be this: in this highly polarized environment, where it seems to me particularly conservatives relish just embarrassing people as opposed to generating a productive conversation, the piece of the report that I would worry about on Monday, there's 2 of them. One is the assumption that there will be no increase in utilization with especially universal coverage with no out-of-pocket payments. And the second is the statement that even though you're proposing Medicare rates for doctors and hospitals hospitals will break even because charity care will be less, administrative costs will be less, and debt, bad debt will be less. That's, and well, I won't go into detail. I doubt it, given that you have no hospital budgets proposed in that study. But I don't want to try to coach you on that. I just want to suggest be ready for it. I think telling the world that this is just a divisioning document doesn't help much. I've never heard of such a thing, especially in this much detail. But however you want to characterize it, I will be ready on Monday for some people to go after both of those statements in the study. And I wish you the best of luck.
So,
Thank you.
Can you identify
Yes.
yourself again, the last speaker?
This is Kip Sullivan in Minnesota.
Thanks, Kip.
Yes, Kip, this is Hank.
Oh, okay.
We expect the Maine Hospital Association to have a cow, shall we say. And it's interesting, this study commission, this legislative study commission last month, when the woman who the insurance commissioner from Montana,
Bartlett.
Barbara Bartlett, she had an interesting sort of summation in the last 15 minutes. She says, and she basically, she said, you know, hospital and insurance billing is corrupt. It's opaque. I am an accountant and nobody goes by FASB standards. But my analysis is hospitals should be able to make it at Medicare rates. So that was public testimony from a month ago. So I understand that we will have to finesse the answer of, we just don't know. We know there are studies out there that hospitals are now making on 130%, 136%, you know, of Medicare, you know, if you're taking all payers. All I can say is, when I asked the MESIP person to go into that a little further, they just said, I have no data and I have no idea how to model that. So that is going to be a weakness, and we're going to have to figure out how to respond to that in some sort of way.
All right, well, good.
Kip, this is Tom Byrne, also of Maine All Care, and hi to you. The other additional source of revenue for hospitals beyond the expected savings that you outlined is the bump of payment rates for a state that's quite Medicaid heavy and expanding its Medicaid population from Medicaid payment to hospitals to a Medicare rate.
Yes,
So
yeah.
well, I'm sure you knew that, but I wanted to throw that into the mix as well. And the second thing I would say about that is that if we do get a pushback, you know, when it comes to, you know, formulating a piece of legislation, the additional cost of bumping the entire cost of a program that's state-based by adjusting a hospital payment rate from 100 to, say, 107% of Medicare is still relatively small considering the savings envisioned.
Yeah, and if I were in your shoes, I just wouldn't put that out there. I think once the right wing grabs something that they think is in front, I mean, we've seen that with the Mercatus report. We saw the way the two Republican witnesses in the first of the three, well, now 4 House hearings on Medicare for All, just ripped into Bernie's bill and HR 1384 over this issue of Medicare payment, and nobody was prepared to deal with them. They just wiped everybody up with that. None of our witnesses, none of the Democrats responded, other than, well, there was no response. It was simply, we have a good bill, universal coverage is good, human care is, health care is a human right, blah, blah, blah. I would hate to see you walk into that buzzsaw on Monday.
Thanks, Kip.
This is Steve Kimball. Why
Oh,
didn't you propose global budgets for hospitals instead of Medicare rates?
Too hard to model at this stage for the expertise we had. And also, yeah, that's basically that's basically it.
Okay.
What is the preference in terms of global budget versus Medicare, given the Maine situation? I mean, do you point to global budgets as being a control apparatus and a source of transparency?
I think that's a That's the advice we've gotten from media people. We'll have to wait and deal with that argument because probably the local media won't be sophisticated enough to deal with that or to ask that question. And at this point, I think the answer we've kind of come up with is difficult enough to model without the hospitals having more transparency at this point.
Can I ask another question? In terms of your 7 levels of population, are those tax levels? I mean, is there, in addition to getting reimbursement from normal tax money coming from the feds back to the state, is there a model for the impact, the financial impact on individuals in order to pay a piece of the tax instead of their insurance premium, et cetera?
Yes.
And the answer, yes, absolutely. Let me try to answer that. This is Tom again. Those 7 family models exclusively dealt with the specific income and tax implications for those families. They included a variety of income levels, and if you got a chance or get a chance to look at the analysis in detail, the analysis in detail specifies percentages having to do with people's sort of family incomes. They are also modeled for people that have virtually no family income, which is another way of saying people whose poverty line income makes them Medicaid eligible, to people who earn over $500,000 a year. They include a variety of other factors: the number of children, the percentage of the percentage from up to over 600% of the federally defined poverty line for families and children in combination, and they include a special category for seniors who are dependent fully on Social Security income only. In summation, the personal contributions in tax form, and again, I'm using the word tax even though it's an ugly word politically, the personal contributions are assessed in total at somewhere near $2 billion. There is also an employer assessment based on the size and as determined by the number of employees. That's progressive in nature, as is the personal tax feature, up to over 500 employees.
And what does that bring? What does business bring in globally?
About 2 billion. 2 billion as well.
About 2 billion as well, as Lynn says.
Do you have, just out of curiosity for the cartoon purposes, do you have an average cost to the individual? Like, for example, we're saying right now that everybody in the country is essentially spending $11,700, every man, woman, and child, if you divided the population into the 3.9 trillion. Do you have a cost, an average cost of, is there a shift from that 11,700 to another number in your model, or that can be extrapolated from your model?
There's a base level premium of $6,000. That would be the most anybody would pay on an annual premium basis individually.
That's really interesting. And is that the real cost, or is that just what they're paying? I don't know when the system says we have 3.9 trillion, and you divide the number of people in the country into that number, you get that $11,000 number. So that isn't necessarily what they're necessarily spending in terms of your model. It's the overall cost of the system somehow or another, which is obviously very elusive.
We don't have an average number, but what we do have, based on those 7 families examples that we've given, is that we have an average. We have for each of those groupings an average number, if you will, based on their current premiums paid and their out-of-pocket expenditures as well. Now, granted, these are models with some assumptions in them, but they do try to include both out-of-pocket and premium paid, and then we use that to compare to what they would pay under this model.
What is the total cost that you project for the state on an initial in the first year?
They have
Um,
1.4 billion. We currently pay 13.7, I think it is,
Billion?
billion.
yes,
So that's what your current cost is.
Yeah.
the
And
projection is 1.4 to 1.5 billion less. So you could do the math. It's somewhere around 12.
right. So you're in a position to be able to divide that number by the number of people in the state to talk from a talking point standpoint of what the savings would be from 11,700 down to something else, $10,000, $9,000 in terms of relative value per person.
It doesn't, we'd have to go back to our, the MISA people, the spreadsheet people to run those numbers. We don't break it down that specific. I think the strength of the study is this entity that we contracted has been working in Maine, mostly on tax policy for a long time and knows demographics of the state very well. So these 7 categories, they've mixed it up between single person, one head of household, 2 head of household, 2 kids, et cetera, retired couple, Medicare couple, et cetera. So they actually, I think if people look at the last, let's say 3 pages or 4 pages of the document and our summary, they'll say, oh, so this is how it affects individuals, citizens, residents of the state of Maine.
Nice.
Okay, I see how a family of 4 with a high deductible plan will actually be paying maximum total out of pocket several $1,000s less exposure, et cetera, et cetera. So that's I think one of the selling points is you can it's modeled in a sense. Their creativity, this organization's, besides just running gross numbers and making a lot of assumptions, was sort of coming up with the scenarios for different family groups.
Do you have control of drug prices negotiated in the model?
Too hard to model. Too hard to model at our level.
Not even a participation, and that could be easily another couple of $2 billion down.
Yes, at this point, too hard to model. So
There is a page in the study that addresses the issue about drug pricing and what could happen, but it is not in the model. And yes, you're right. That would represent a significant savings.
Right.
The state as a buyer, it includes sort of the possibilities of setting drug prices, and the state as a buyer for all of its residents. But those are not in the model. What you have proposed as an important press or propaganda piece is an average cost decrease per person.
Right.
I understand, and I get your point. It makes sense. I would think that even though it is not in the published model, it is plausible for us to go back to the organization that did the analysis and ask them to do the arithmetic to get a gross per person decrease. But it is not in the model, as Hank and Lynn and I have already told you.
Given the numbers that you just gave us, it looks like there'd be a 10% decrease in overall healthcare spending in Maine.
That's approximately correct.
I have a question for you. It's Bill Honigman, Dr. Bill in California. With the proposal of the Perry Group for the California, most recent attempt in California, SB 562, they proposed, Bob Poland likes the business gross receipts tax as opposed to I think you described a progressive taxation on businesses. But as an interesting result of gross receipts, public agencies like cities, state itself, schools would be exempt because they don't take in gross receipts. So how do those public agencies fare in terms of having relief from the burden of funding their public employees, at the state and county and municipal level under your model?
The the answer is that under this model, the employers of public employees would still face the employer tax in the model. The projections are that for the entities that pay for teachers, policemen, firemen, etc., they would be subject to the same modeling based on the number of employees. And the projection, and Lynn can perhaps correct me if she has the study in front of her, of about $240 million savings to public entities, which would include not only the decrease in premiums is a bad word, terrible, slap me, the decrease in tax contribution, plus also the cutting in half of the contributions towards workmen's compensation insurance.
It is listed. He has done that modeling, but it's probably only one graph and a small paragraph in the study.
And
you'll see it there, but it's not explained in depth.
No, it seems
And that would be on average, right? So like say smaller public agencies or ones that are not employee heavy. Like say school districts tend to be very employee heavy, and so obviously they have much higher costs for employee health in those public agencies, right? So is there any breakdown for that to understand?
Not granular. Granular. It's the 240 million is across the state. And
right.
This is a state of a million people. So it's a gross. It's not granularly broken down.
But, excuse me, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yes.
Hey, you just muted yourself. There
Okay.
you are.
Okay. I think that an important point is they figure a reduction in property tax of 1.5 mil. That's for individual towns, that's a big deal.
Okay. I'm going to mute everybody again, and then unmute yourself when you want to speak. But we are halfway through the meeting, and we want to be sure everybody gets a chance to speak. Any other comments from or about Maine? Bill?
I'd like to just ask politically, if this model works, how many states within our 17 or 22 states inside OPS do you think could potentially establish some kind of agreement about that model as replicable for them in terms of their political advocacy as a small state block inside the campaign?
Before anybody answers, I'm going to mute everybody, and then you have to unmute yourself. There's a little noise in the background. Here we go. Mute all.
I would suggest that you read the full report when it's posted by Monday, and I think then get back together and that'll be a separate conversation.
I think it's crucially important to look at this thing politically in terms of how it gets expanded and used, and adopted by comparable states in the country to just give us leverage.
I think this is Hank. I think we'll have to wait in 2 to 3 weeks or a month and see if this actually has any legs. It has enough assumptions, and the criticisms may or may not be heavy, depends upon whether it even gets noticed in any sort of way. So I would say wait a couple of weeks and we'll talk about it again.
Okay, I think it's good that we've had this long discussion, and we all can go to One Payer State's website to get more details and further discussion. So are we ready to move on? Agreed?
This is Tom. I just want to thank the conference call participants in allowing us to present this all to you today.
Great.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Really great work.
Yes, thanks much. So there was a note from Bill on Policy Committee past report. Bill Bronston.
You want me to run?
Yeah.
So the Policy Committee has about 17 people on it, but the 17 have never really met in total. and it's been very raggedy in terms of just the process of talking about anything. So what happened was that there was an original list that I laid out of about 25 or 30 issues that KIPP took and reframed into about 17 issues based on a strategy for the policy committee to go systematically, one or two issues at a time, through that list in terms of trying to get a handle on what the significance of each of those policy elements are. So what's interesting is that the whole conversation for the last, 2 years practically, has really accepted the model inside the single payer legislations that have existed, 562 or 1384 or 1138, whatever is Sanders' bill. But there's never really been meaningful conversation about the care model, and what exists inside the fiscal capability of the operation to work. I mean, and the conversation around whether or not how to block any kind of risk-bearing capitation notion, ACO, HMO penetration into the system has really been the hammer blow that's been happening between about 5 members of the committee, Peter Shapiro and Kip Sullivan, who's the lead kind of thinker in this thing, Steve Kemble, and so on. About five of you have been in this conversation that's been very sophisticated. However, what's been missing, I think, is our heartful, intuitive thought about what the new system needs to have in it and whether or not that has to be included in the language of legislation in order to look at the completeness of 1384 or anything that would happen at the state level. So for example, there would have to be a clear angle of what the healthcare system is, articulated up front in terms of what the context of the whole delivery system is. Secondly, who is going to be part of the delivery system, which has to do with the whole personnel model, the education model, subsidization, and so on and so forth, just transition for people that are going to lose their jobs. So there's a who kind of a group of policy issues. Then there's a what. That is, we're talking about comprehensive care, we're talking about drug coverage, mental health coverage, lifetime long-term care coverage, mental health coverage, and so forth. Research, all in the what is going to be provided. What's the model of a healthcare delivery system that's all inclusive? And then the question of how has to do with all the costs. How are we going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? How it's going to be modeled. Then the next piece of that has to do with governance. There's another block that has to do with how this is going to be democratized, how the model is going to challenge the corporate totalitarian control that currently exists and continues to shrink in terms of creating the proletarianization of all the people in the system and forcing them into money-driven behaviors. That has to be broken, absolutely, and transformed in the other direction. So the question of how low governance goes from state to neighborhood, from nation to state to neighborhood, becomes a very real question. Where's the break between empowered policy, leadership, planning, and advisory relationships to the system to make sure that that there's enough empowerment low enough in the system to make sure that there is a real force to decentralize this corporate concentrated block of major hospitals that deliver the majority of the concentration of capital in the system. So that's kind of just the simplest kind of checklist of these specific items. So KIPP is really pissed off that we don't have an agenda, and that our approach to this thing is very raggedy and very haphazard, and it depends upon who's on the goddamn telephone in terms of how the conversation goes, and what comes out of the conversation is not necessarily uniform. And so the last meeting that we had, which was about 3 or 4 days ago, it's only 3 people on the call, and we talked about drug policy. We just picked one issue, in order to look at it and to compare it to what Gaffney and PNHP did in terms of their presentation a few months ago in terms of a comprehensive pharmaceutical strategy. And so two members of the committee, Charlie Swanson and Henry Broski, are tasked with coming up with some kind of a summary of what it was that we talked about in terms of how the drug question gets included in the larger picture. The thing that the policy committee is charged with doing is to really look at the comprehensivity of our understanding of the new healthcare system, so that when we're talking to people, we talk to people about what's going to happen, what they're going to get, not just in terms of their savings, but in terms of their security, in terms of their care, in terms of their sense of being able to get rid of the fear that lives in everybody because of the way in which the system is set up.
So Bill, can you put that into a 2-paragraph summary and put it on the website? Give us an estimate of your progress and your goals in the policy committee?
Yes, it's very humble to begin with. And the thing that I think has to happen is that the people that are involved in the policy committee really have to show up, and they have to be part of the decision-making process of how we're going to cleanly and efficiently move forward through these issues, and what matters. If we come up with an ideal system, who gives a shit? You know, how are we going to embed it in something real out there in terms of the conversation and the legislation?
Good.
The next meeting is going to be on January the 9th at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. It's a Zoom call on this same Zoom channel, and we'll take the next step in terms of looking at the list, in terms of breaking out the issues that have to be dealt with. Kip's suggestion is that we deal with the angle and the preamble last, after we look at everything, which is an issue that I had in listening to this main conversation. In terms of the costs, we got to be very clear about what we're paying for. What is the delivery system going to look like? How is it going to be radically different from what we experience now, which is all money driven in terms of staffing, in terms of location, in terms of everything. You know, to turn this into a human service really is a radical thinking challenge.
Okay, Bill, you promised a brief report, and that was a long report.
Sorry.
So condense it and put it on the website if you can.
Yes, Mike. Any comments at all from anybody?
Brief.
Yeah, this is Charlie, and I want to comment that some of what Bill is talking about, in my view, is, I mean, it's a long-term vision perhaps, but we don't necessarily need to change the delivery system immediately to do a lot of what we want to do. I mean, a lot of us are more focused on changing the financing system, and we expect that once we do, that can have an effect on delivery systems. So I actually will push back a little bit on some of what Bill said, that
I understand.
you don't necessarily need to do everything at once.
Okay, fight it out in your policy call, and that's a clarion call from Bill. Please join it. If you want to influence one-payer states and legislation, please join the policy call, and it's next week, Bill?
January 9.
Oh, January 9th.
At 9 a.m. Pacific time, 11 Central, and 12 East.
Okay, thanks. So let's move on to Bob Mason. Can you give a report about Pennsylvania?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Very interesting to hear the other reports. I'll try to be quick about this. So Pennsylvania has had a single-payer legislation in both houses of our state assembly for many years. In the current session, it hasn't been reintroduced. Actually, I was very interested in Bill's report because I think we tick off many of the boxes you mentioned, probably not as deeply or comprehensively as you were explaining regarding the policy discussion, but I think that our legislation does address a number of those items. So we're waiting for it to be reintroduced. Our main focus in 2020 is really through our C4 to support legislators and other candidates, incumbents, and also candidates who are committed to single payer, some of those, particularly in the Pittsburgh area, are being primaried by conservative Democrats, party Democrats. So we want to get behind them as much as we can do under the what's available for a C4. The other thing we're doing is looking more at coalition building, and particularly in Pittsburgh, we're trying to connect with many groups that are focused on climate change and environmental justice. And we see it as a natural potential marriage between issues around healthcare and the climate and pollution, et cetera, clean air, clean water. So that's kind of what we're doing here in Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Bob. Any further comments from Pennsylvania or to Bob about what they're doing?
Do you have any kind of a printed discussion about the connection between healthcare and climate?
We're actually still working on the messaging. Noah Levinson, I think, is working on that. I've put together a very brief, like 4 or 5 sentence statement about it. I can certainly share that, but it's extremely preliminary. And when I wrote it up, it was the idea that we wanted something brief that would explain the connection to the general public.
Okay, good. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
So there's comment from Catherine to everyone. Make an agenda. I apologize. I did not get Chuck's agenda out to everybody. I'm just amazed that we're all on 30 of us talking with each other as we have, but we'll be better next time. Okay.
Jesus.
So any other state reports? We have just, 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Bruce, Charlie, about Oregon?
I could say just a little bit about Oregon. That we have the biggest news from Oregon, or the biggest effort in Oregon, is there is a task force being implemented, which is tasked to make legislative recommendations on how we could implement a single-payer system in Oregon. And today is the last day for people to apply to be on the task force, and it should be moving forward. We did manage to talk with some legislators this week and change the date at which the report is due. It's a little bit more realistic now. It's going to actually match and have an 18-month timeline, which matches the timeline of the FSCO. They're hiring some new people to be able to help with this within our Oregon Health Authority. So now the timeline of the task force is supposed to do matches the FSCO, which is good.
Thanks, Charlie. Anyone else want to comment on Oregon or ask questions of Charlie? Okay, other states.
Can I ask, has there ever, should we be doing a rigorous analysis of 1384 in relationship to where there needs to be attention and where there needs to be extrapolation to any state model?
Charlie, you got a comment? Or Bruce?
Well, we did that when we were writing the tasks for the task force to do. So we did pay quite a bit of attention to what was in 1384, and I think the biggest change we made related to long-term care. So we paid a lot of attention to what Jayapal's bill did with long-term care, and used quite a bit of that in our bill. So yes, I think every state should be looking at that very carefully.
So I want everybody to see who's attending our meeting from Corvallis, Oregon. and our legislative committee meeting will start right at 10, our time. So we want to make good use of the remaining time. Anybody else want to comment on Oregon or another state?
This is Marcia. I'd like to comment on Washington State.
Okay, Marcia.
Yeah, hi, everyone. We have a universal healthcare work group that met for the second time past week. And they have it's a group of all stakeholders. They're proceeding to talk about all these things to set some boundaries, some guidelines for what they're going to accomplish and what questions they're going to consider. It's very kind of from the bottom up in the group, but the group consists of legislators, hospitals, insurance people, the insurance commissioner, advocates like our single payer advocates, doctors, hospitals, everything. So it's a broad cross section, and they have started to have some substantive meetings with public comments, and public comments on our bill on the group have been expanded through December 30th because we had to have our meeting was cut short on Monday. So they've increased the scope of it. So we're just moving along. We're another study doing another state doing a study, and a group that's working on what we can do in our particular state, which is what we think has to be done, work with our own demographics right here as one part of the whole state efforts.
So Marcia, is your bill on the One Payer States website?
No, we don't have a bill.
Oh,
We're
okay.
developing a recommendation to the legislature that they will follow up on in 2021. The report is due out this coming November.
If you're willing to share.
There's a description of the task force and everything and all that stuff, right?
Yes,
Like
there's
Marcia and the other
information on
pages.
the website. If you go to the Healthcare Authority, Google Washington State Healthcare Authority, there's a page for the Universal Healthcare Workgroup, and I could actually forward that to
me.
Barbara. Yes.
I mean, I need to update everybody's, and I'm trying to take notes, but I'll be getting in touch. My recollection is there is something about the task force, but not that it's meeting.
Okay, I'll do that.
No, there is information on the OPS site about the task force.
Is this a trusted group? Was this set up bureaucratically, or was this set up from the community? I mean,
It was set up by application. There was an application process, and it was open to the entire public. With people, they needed to submit essays on why they would be a good addition to the group and where their special expertise was, what category they fit in. Were they a consumer of healthcare, a patient, an ordinary patient? Were they a representative of one of these categories I already mentioned? And then we also wrote some letters in support of specific people. Their supporters wrote in support of their application. So I think that let's see, the Healthcare Authority was looking at all of the applications and essays and deciding, I think probably together with the legislators, I imagine, not entirely sure on that, but the people and the bureaucrats were choosing, but based on public input.
Okay, this is thanks, Marcia. This is a reminder, everybody who's listening, to send your latest ideas into Barbara Pearson. She's waving her hand, if you can see her, so she can keep the One Payer States website updated, and we can all share the wisdom, collective wisdom. Any other?
Pearson at Gmail, BZ Pearson, Z is in zebra, Pearson at gmail.com.
Okay.
Or if I write you, please answer.
Again, Barbara, it's BZ Pearson at Gmail.
Yes, yeah. B Barbara Z Pearson.
Barbara Z Pearson.
No. I mean it's BZ Pearson.
Right.
But
good.
I was just making it clear why it was B and why it was Z.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. We need to summarize in about 5 minutes. And one thing Chuck wanted us to be sure to talk about, all 30 of us, is that we have a wonderful thing going here, this sharing of ideas. But it will take organization. It does take organization, and will take money. And we are in the process of deciding what will be membership, terms of membership, some at least nominal contribution from everybody who wants to support One Payer States. And so there's going to be a proposal to the Organization and Development Committee. Some of you are on that committee to establish ideas of membership. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay.
This is Chuck. You hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mike. Yeah. So what we're Catherine, myself, and Mike are the existing officers, and therefore the board members. I mean, we constitute what we have in the form of a board. And so the conversation we're having is getting folks to think about contributing either $4 or $8 a month. So that would be $48 or $96 a month, a year, excuse me. So that's sort of the sliding scale starting point, and that way folks can be, it can be achieved even $2 a month, whatever people can actually manage or handle, and that will allow us to budget going forward. And also, we do need to have folks step forward and consider doing service on the C4 board, as well as what will be soon constituted a C3 board. And then we would have 4 meetings a year, and we would have an annual face-to-face conference away from the national healthcare conference that we've been sort of piggybacking on all these years. We want to do a standalone conference and move it around the country. So those are some of the ideas that we talked about the other day, Catherine, Mike, and myself. So if folks have any feedback on that, I know we're almost at the top of the hour. Certainly shoot feedback to myself and Mike and Catherine. But I just want to wish everybody a great, happy holiday, and just so grateful for all the work that you guys are doing. And I am just coming off of this hearing. I'm standing under cover from the rain in Washington, D.C. at Rayburn House Office Building. If you didn't catch it, see if you can pick up the discussion on single-payer funding that Ro Khanna chaired. There were 3 economists and a National Nurses Union advocate. It was fantastic, and it addressed a lot of the topic, or a lot of the questions that were being addressed today. So again, thank you all, and thanks, Mike, for carrying the baton today. And look forward to catching up to folks in the new year. And the next call is going to be January 17th, Friday the 17th, and it's going to be 11 a.m. We did 12 today to try to wiggle this conference hearing around our call. So thank you again, everybody. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. And as you can see, the crowd is building here in Corvallis, and we will need to bring this discussion to a close. Any final comments in less than 1 minute?
If you're going to serve breakfast, I'll come.
Okay. All right.
Chuck, can you put together a very simple bulleted set of needs that you have for the C4 and C3 to us? You know, what kinds of feedback do you need immediately, structurally or economically? And I know you've been asking for $800 to kind of put something together in terms of getting the C4, I believe.
C3.
Chuck?
I'm sorry, I muted myself. The 800 is for the C3, and that's a good idea. That's a good idea. We will throw together at least a skeletal budget just to give people a sense as to where the funds would be going. But thank you for that proposal.
And
we'll
what
get
you
something
need,
over to
and anything else that you need, so we all have the same thing and we'll respond to it. Let's make that a major agenda item on the 17th.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let's clean it up.
All right. Next time, let's have everybody talk as much as Bill did today. Okay.
I'll get a note from my mother.
Okay, we're signing out.
Thank you, Mike, everyone. Bye.
Okay.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.